Porque lo ngatong sia. Porque porque lo ngatong jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate. Porque lo ngatong sia. Porque lo ngatong jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate. Porque lo ngatong sia. Porque lo ngatong jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate. Porque lo ngatong sia. Porque lo ngatong jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate. Porque lo ngatong sia. Porque lo ngatong jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate kudu nyai ilade jarate.
What is black? It's a strange question because nothing can be more clear than the varying hues of brown to blue to deep-tinted gray our people carry. Yet, as a collective, we ignore our own worldwide. Sadly, whites are not ignoring us. On the contrary, they engage and oppress us whenever they can. They rape our women, pillage our lands, murder and jail our men globally, indiscriminately, with calculation and eerie consistency. I ask you, is there one place where our people are, that whites have come, where we have not been annihilated or oppressed? The answer is no. They move as a collective and teach us to act as individuals. We often speak of our ancestors, honoring them, not letting their sacrifices be in vain, yet we think these struggles are reasons to vote, to march, to engage in civil discourse, to negotiate with monsters. If only we argue the right points, if only we gain enough votes, if only we can pass the right laws, then we can end the division between us. We ignore the fact that this path has never worked. And despite small victories, the oppression of our people, based on our beautiful skin, persists everywhere on earth. There is no place it does not exist. Whites collectively like to play both oppressor and savior of those they oppress. Whenever we fight for our joint liberation, we have allowed whites and their mindsets to subvert our movements. Our history of fighting for decolonization is not taught. We do not hear of the Black Community Survival Conference, nor are we taught that the unified Black Power movement stretched throughout Oceania, including Australia, New Zealand, Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, and so many other places. We are not told of the Wagani seminars, the Papa Basana movement, and Black civil uprisings like the Bougainville. Whites do not want us to know about anti-colonist sessions held worldwide or the African Negritude movement. We are not to understand what our people have done globally with us in America in mind. Indeed, it is not just us blacks in the U.S. or in South America or Africa that were fighting. It was our brothers not displaced by slavery, but who had been colonized nonetheless, who were pushing back against white tyranny. We associate so much with the slave trade, but we ignore that blacks who had no displacement because of the slave trade are equally oppressed. Our people are oppressed everywhere by whites, and we can end this, but we lack unity. In fact, today we shun unity, despite having a common enemy and oppressor. I wanted to speak toward the oppression of blacks on our earth that has nothing to do with the African slave trade, in the hopes that I can show it is nothing but the color of our skin that so many of them hate. And because there is no crevice of this planet we can go to escape that reality, we must end the tyranny against our people everywhere and uniformly united. We cannot accomplish this alone. When we fight in small groups, whole nations of our people are annihilated. Whites think nothing of genocide, and to this very day, as I speak, whole colonies of black people are destroyed without remorse. So perhaps hearing just a few of the stories of our people will open the door to a desire in the hearts of those who do not seek unity, to desire unity amongst us globally. I want to speak both of past oppressions and current, but the list is so exhaustive, I could not possibly cover it all in one video. In the hope that we cure the ignorance of division that plagues us. Let's start in Tasmania, because they are an example of what happens when a group of black people refuses to be oppressed and made subject to white rule. There is so much we can learn by those who fought against colonization about how the enemy moves and how we can best defend each other in this struggle for decolonization and promotion of blackness globally. In 1876, a beautiful Tasmanian woman, the last full-blooded Tasmanian, died. Her name was Truganini. Before she died, she saw the destruction of her people. Between 1803 and 1876, whites from Britain exterminated nearly all of the Tasmanians, and those who survived were sent to prison camps where they died of disease and despair. In less than 80 years, whites wiped out the entire black Tasmanian population. On paper, Tasmanians had the full and equal protection of British law. However, in practice, the words of white people have no meaning. This is something we know even today. And much like with black people all over the world, even when a government knows of murders and cruelties committed against blacks by whites, they did nothing. And in Tasmania, they did nothing. Within 15 years of arriving on Tasmanian soil, whites realized that the land of those black peoples was ideal for raising sheep. They proceeded to steal, without a treaty or any payment to the Tasmanian people, huge amounts of Tasmanian land. The Tasmanian people refused to take this thievery and oppression lying down. They rebelled strongly against the British whites, becoming more and more violent toward them in an effort to protect themselves. If only they had had the backing globally of our people, they might be alive today. However, history has taught us what whites do to blacks who will not submit and who have no strong support from the global black community. Blacks with no protection from the rest of their kind. In 1826, the British governor, George Arthur, declared the black Tasmanian people open enemies beyond the protection of the law. It created an open season on murder of Tasmanians that was called the War of Extermination. They had their reasons for why whites should kill Tasmanians. They wanted to get revenge for the past killings of the Tasmanian people who were rebelling against white colonization. For every one white the Tasmanians killed, 70 Tasmanians were murdered. I find this fascinating because our people are so humane. When the leader of Black First Land First today in South Africa spoke about violence against blacks, he was only willing to kill 7 whites for every black person murdered. But our open enemies killed 70 blacks for every 1 white. They killed them to protect their sheep, beasts, and the land that they had stolen from the Tasmanians. They killed the Tasmanian people so that they could take the women and the girls and force them into labor and sex. They killed the Tasmanian people for sport, the way you would an animal. They killed the Tasmanian people just because they could. These are their actual legitimate reasons. By 1829, with only a few hundred Tasmanian people left, the whites did what they always do. They pretended to become the protectors of the very people they were annihilating, and started a bogus effort called conciliation and protection. Despite the sweet-sounding name, the reality and the real meaning of conciliation and protection was to capture the few hundred Tasmanian people left and imprison them in prison camps. In 1830, the white government set up the Aborigines Committee to try and understand why the Tasmanians were so hostile towards white people. The all-white committee concluded that the Tasmanian blacks were treacherous and savage. How often have we heard that about black people? We're treacherous, we're savage. And those qualities were the problem. Not the barbarianism, thievery, murder, colonization, and oppression of the whites. By the 1850s, the genocide of the Tasmanians was justified through Darwinic evolutionary thinking as natural and inevitable. I cannot begin to tell you how disgusting I find Darwinism and the theory of evolution. They believed that the Tasmanian people were justified in being annihilated because White insanity and mass murder was little more than an example of survival of the fittest. Seriously, this is what they taught. And today in our schools, they teach our black children about Darwin when he was just a racist who developed the theory of evolution and put indigenous black people at the bottom of the human evolutionary chart. And whites use this to justify the murder of Aboriginal people throughout the earth. In the late 1800s, when mixed-race Tasmanian children, the children stolen from Tasmanian women and girls, asked for their land back, the government sent them to Cape Barren Island, where they lived until 1951, beyond the reach of the law. From the 1920s to the 1970s, the government took their children from them to teach them white ways, because the ways of murderers and thieves are superior to blacks. And that is still what we believe today. Since the 1990s, there has been some land given back and apologies made, as whites do to soothe their collective conscience. However, the whites' apologies are fake, as they always are, because throughout the rest of Australia, they continued the same process of black native annihilation. Case in point, following the genocide of the Tasmanians between 1910 and 1970, between 3 and 1 in 10 Indigenous children were kidnapped from their families. No one knows for sure how many, but the estimates are between 50 and 100,000. As mentioned before, the theft of black children was justified by Darwinic evolutionary thinking that placed Aborigines at the bottom of the evolutionary ladder and whites at the top. According to Darwin, the annihilation of lesser evolved people was destined to occur. In other words, the rape and pillage of the black Aboriginal people and the kidnapping of their children had the white scientific stamp of approval. One of the children who was taken at the age of 2 years old, Valerie Leno, spoke about her capture. She said it was because of the color of their skin to make the country whiter and whiter. At the age of 66, she talked about how she was abused, beaten, and raped, whilst under the so-called Aborigines Welfare Board's supervision. A court ordered that she be paid a whole insulting $35,000 as an apology for the deep psychological scars and abuses she suffered. Just her, not all the children that were stolen. Valerie Leno said that she knew no one was going to listen to a black child. But we must listen. She and the others on this planet who share our skin are black, and our oppression is universal. I want to move on to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. In 2010, Bo Sur, the last member of the Bo tribe from India's Andaman Islands, died at the age of 85. Her language and her culture died with her. In 2010, the Great Andamanese were the first of the cluster of the island peoples that were massacred by whites. And after they were killed, the indigenous people were exposed to genocidal, paternalistic policies, and their land was stolen. When the whites first came to the Andaman Islands in 1858, they killed most of the black natives, and those who were not murdered died from the diseases that white people carry. The Boa fought back, and since the whites could not pacify them with violence, they tried to civilize them. Interesting, as whites collectively are the least civilized of all humans. Much like in Australia, they captured the black natives and put them in what they called Andaman homes. The conditions were so bad that the 150 children who were born in these Andaman homes all died by the age of 2 years old. The tribes were introduced to alcohol and exposed to gifts of the whitewashed ruling Indian elite. This all was done to control them and take their land. Before she died in 2010, Beau Sur was said to have been so lonely, as she was the only one of her people left, the only one who spoke her language, and thus she was completely isolated, literally incapable of communicating with another human being. When I think about the fact that this was only 9 years ago, it is heartbreaking. The annihilation of an entire black population only 9 years ago is disgusting. Before she died, Beau Sur also expressed concern for the other tribes of the Andaman Islands, specifically the Jarowaw tribe, and she was wise and right to be concerned, because the Jarowaw tribe is in danger. Human safaris that can be likened to the human zoos of the Western world currently expose these vulnerable black people to the degradation so many of our people have suffered throughout time. We like to pretend that blacks are viewed as human, but if that is the case, how in 2019 are you able to watch our people the way you would wildlife? Members of the tribe have come forward to protest the sexual abuse of their young black girls by white poachers who are entering their forests to harass the tribe. The whites bring alcohol and drugs to the reserve and use it to sexually exploit the girls from the tribe. One of the tribal members is quoted as saying, "The girls say the outside boys press them lots. They press them using hands and nails. When the girls get angry, they chase them under the influence of alcohol. They fuck the girls. They drink alcohol in the house of the girls. They also sleep in the Jarowa's houses. They chase the girls after smoking marijuana." His comments came a week after 8 Jarowaw girls were kidnapped by white men. 7 of those men were arrested. There are countless reports of other sexual exploitation of the women from the tribe. Many have seen video footage of the girls from the tribe being coerced into dancing semi-naked in return for food, but I refuse to play that footage for this video. The human safaris were temporarily banned, but they're legal again, and hundreds of vehicles still pour through the jungle every day, packed with white tourists whose main purpose is to see and try to photograph these black people. There were once 10 tribes on these islands. Now there are only 4. All of the other Black people there are dead, annihilated within 80 years of contact with white people. Let's move on to India. India was among the foremost countries to denounce the iniquitous system of apartheid in South Africa, which is funny, as their white Indo population engages in the same policies that degrade their black populations as did their white South African counterparts. Few people are aware that India's 160 million untouchables are Dalits, are descendants of Africans who once ruled the Indus Valley. Despite this, today, caste discrimination affects all Black people in India. I ask you not to be moved by the fact that these people have straight hair and finer features. They are Black. They are of African descent. Dravidians are a linguistic group under which many different groups fall, but many scholars have found linguistic and cultural links between Dravidians and Africans. One scholar, Diop, wrote, "The Indo-Europeans," and I want you to note that there are Indo-Blacks and Indo-Europeans, meaning Indian Black people and Indian Europeans. The Indian Europeans are the white-skinned Indians from India you normally see, but there are also Black Indians. Never created a civilization in their own native lands, the Eurasian plains. So the Indo-Europeans never created a civilization in their own native lands, their Eurasian plains. Note, Eurasian plains is what this scholar says. I make the argument that Asians are white for a reason. The civilizations attributed to them are inevitably located in the heart of Negro countries in the southern part of the Northern Hemisphere. These lines have been rewritten, but these countries I'm about to mention are part of Africa. Egypt, Arabia, Phoenicia, Mesopotamia, Elam, and India. In all those lands, there were Negro civilizations when the Indo-Europeans arrived as rough nomads during the second millennium. Diop described how the Dravidians, as a type of the Black race, had black skin, often exceptionally black, with straight hair, aquiline nose, thin lips, and acute cheekbone angle, and we find the prototype of this race in India. We call them the Dravidian. Today, the descendants of the Dravidians, who number 3 times the entire population of the United Kingdom, live in what is often called India's hidden apartheid. The atrocities against them include caste-motivated killing, rape, so many other abuses that are daily occurrences in India. Both the state and private citizens commit these crimes with complete impunity. Attempts by these Black people to defy the caste order, to try to demand their rights, or to lay claim to the land that is theirs, are consistently met with economic boycotts or retaliatory violence. For example, in Punjab, on January 5, 2006, a Dalit laborer and activist, Bant Singh, seeking the prosecution of the people who gang raped his little girl, was beaten so severely that both of his arms and one of his legs had to be amputated. In another village, a Dalit family was killed by an upper caste mob after the mother and the daughter were stripped, beaten, and paraded through the village, and the two brothers were brutally beaten. They were attacked because they refused to let the white farmers take their land. The children face consistent hurdles in access to education. They are made to sit in the back of the classrooms and endure verbal and physical harassment from teachers and students. The effects of that abuse is borne out in the fact that there is a low literacy rate and a high dropout rate for these Black people. The Black people in India may not cross the line that divides their part of the village from that occupied by the white higher castes. They're not allowed to worship in the same temples or use the same wells. Does that remind you of Jim Crow? Of apartheid in Africa? They can't even drink the same water as the whites in India. They cannot use the same cups. They are denied the land that is legally theirs. They are made to take the most degrading jobs and are subjected to violence, and their women and their girls are raped. The Black Dalits are at the bottom of the Hindu caste system. As with all white oppression throughout the earth, there are laws that are supposed to protect them, but the laws don't stop the widespread discrimination against the Blacks in India. The 15% of the population that is Black is kept on the very margins of society because they are considered untouchable. Let's move on to Fiji. I feel it's only right to follow up India with Fiji, as the Indian white elite brought their beliefs of Black inferiority to the Fijian islands. Most notably, the Indian Prime Minister was scheming to allow Indians, who make up 44% of the 780,000 person population, to take over their land. Fiji consists of 14 geographical provinces and simultaneously 3 confederacies divided along tribal lines. In many areas, there are historic and current racial divides. These divisions began when the United Kingdom whites came to Fiji and colonized Fijian land. Those whites refused to leave until the Fijians agreed to follow a Europeanized constitution and rules of governance. Once the Fijians complied, Ratu Sir Mara was made the first Prime Minister of independent, so-called Fiji. And he received from Prince Charles the first documents evidencing Fiji's independence. Since then, the Fijians have fought tirelessly to liberate themselves from white foreign colonizational rule. They've had no less than 4 coups. Both before and after Fiji gained its independence from the United Kingdom in 1970, tensions between the indigenous Fijians and the white Indo-European Fijian ethnic groups existed. Today, Black Fijians live under a half-caste and white Indo dictatorship headed by Frank Bainimarama and junta. His regime controls all aspects of life in Fiji at the barrel of a gun. And the Black Fijians live in complete poverty on their own land. And again, as with all governmental caste systems created by whites, The elections are a sham, and diplomatic liberation is impossible. Even after the junta and all its actions were deemed illegal by Fiji's appeal court ruling of 2009, the terror of our Fijian brothers continues. Fijian blacks are bound in the shackles of a military dictatorship led by a murderer. In just the past year, Fijian police and military have been accused in several cases of torture and harassment against the black natives. In the schools, the children are beaten, and despite the Indo-Fijian dictator's claims, the laws being passed are not protecting the black people who rightfully own that land. The Fijian people face many problems and contradictions because in a country that is so well endowed with natural resources, both on land and in the water, there is gross unemployment in the black community. And the prevalence of young Fijians being accused of committing criminal acts is becoming more and more common. And yet, as a collective, we do not protect them either. Let's move to Nepal. Nepal is bordered by Tibet, which is in China, to the north, along with India and Bangladesh to the south. In 1923, in the way that whites do worldwide, Britain and the British East India Company signed an agreement that meant Nepal would lose most of its territories. By the 1950s, along with India's independence, Nepal gained so-called independence. Since then, it's teetered between a monarchy, communism, and parliamentary democracy. Anglo-Indo-whites, in the tradition of their own country, have brought their racism to Nepal. Nepal's ethnic Madhesi community has a history of mass protesting mainstream political party racism. The mainstream Nepali parties don't consider the black-skinned Tari people as their own. The Nepali ruling class discriminates against black-skinned Madhesi people, despite the fact that they make up half of the population. And as in every white colonized place, the black population of Nepal does not have representation in parliament that reflects their numbers. They also have no justice. The government, of course, is overall dismissive of any claims about widespread discrimination against these black people. The historical record shows the contrary. It shows that they are marginalized and that those groups have become vocal. After the monarchy, which was over 2 centuries old, was abolished in 2008, as a democratic process was put in motion. The Maoists who fought government forces from 1996 until 2006 were instrumental in the monarchy's ousting. However, in the present day, the conversion of the oppressing class, authoring their own correction with regard to racism, because whites are always committing the crime and then becoming the protector. Despite white paternalism, the black populations of Nepal suffer alongside their brothers in India as a class of untouchable and undesirable persons. Let's move to the Philippines. I wanted to move to the Philippines and so many other countries, but I think that we've established a pattern of Black people not being unified globally, but in pockets trying to fight back. And the reason, again, that I chose these particular countries is because these people are not in their countries because of slavery. The people that I talked about today, they are native to these lands. You see, the hatred that so many whites have is because of our skin. It is not because of a culture developed through slavery. It is because of what we look like. And until we recognize that our skin has caused the justification of our oppression, and it must be our skin that unites us in decolonization and promotion of Blackness, we will fail as a people globally. None of us will win without all of us. The progress has to happen together. In the 70s, they quelled it, and I want to talk about that in a separate video. What the global revolution was looking like, and how globally they went about to usurp the revolution. But I tell you that the revolution happens in waves. And as they push it down, it rises back up. And the time is coming. This begins my series on decolonization and Blackness. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. My content will be sparse until about mid-April, and then I hope to pick up with really, really regular content. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that another time, but you guys, unity, there's nothing without it. We'll accomplish nothing without it. There is no price. There is no reparation. There is no justice without decolonization. Their money is dirty. The whites have ruled for a very short period of time in human history. The world was at peace under our people's rule, and it is time that our people rule once again. With that said, I'll talk to you guys later.